If you've never had to actively uninvite a parent from your wedding, I hope you never do. It's not like in the movies. There's no dramatic moment, no tearful confrontation, at least not in my case. Just a slow, grinding decision that chews on you for months, then finally gets spit out in a phone call that lasts 6 minutes and ends with both people hanging up feeling like they lost something important. I didn't invite my mom to my wedding, and I'm not proud of it. But at the time, it felt justified. Growing up, my mom was the kind of person who made everything about her. If I got sick, she'd say she was the one who couldn't sleep. If I got an award, she'd say she had to drive me to all those practices. If I cried, she'd sigh and say she was just doing her best. It was subtle, most of the time. A twist of tone. A look that lasted a beat too long. A guilt trip disguised as concern. She wasn't abusive. She wasn't a monster. But she made love feel like a transaction, one I was always behind on. By the time I got engaged, we were already barely speaking. She didn't like my fiancé. Said he wasn't strong enough for me, whatever that meant. She'd make little comments during family dinners, about his job, his voice, his laugh. Once she asked him right in front of me if his parents had always been so hands-off. That was when I stopped inviting her over. That was when I started noticing how quiet he got after every interaction with her. That was when I realized I didn't want that energy anywhere near the most important day of my life. So I made the decision. I told her over the phone that we were having a small ceremony. Just a few friends. Immediate family. She paused. Then said, "So I'm not immediate anymore?" I said nothing. She hung up. 3 weeks later, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just 5 words written in cursive on a blank card. "You'll regret this one day." I threw it away. The wedding was beautiful, quiet, intimate, everything we wanted. My dad came. My sister came. My best friend cried during the vows. And yet, when I looked around the room, when I scanned the faces during dinner, there was this absence I couldn't quite ignore. Not guilt, just a shadow, a shape that wasn't filled. It didn't ruin the day, but it sat at the edge of it, watching. 3 months later, my mom had a stroke. She survived. But everything changed. And so did I. When I got the call from my sister, I was at the grocery store holding a bag of frozen peas. I don't know why I remember that detail so clearly. Maybe because when your life splits into before and after, your brain grabs onto something stupid and mundane just to anchor you. She said the words flatly. It was a stroke. She's in the ICU. My first reaction wasn't panic or grief, it was confusion. Because in my head, my mom had become more of a concept than a person. An emotional weather system I had learned to avoid. I hadn't seen her in 9 months since before the wedding. We hadn't spoken since that phone call. And now I was standing in the frozen food aisle, realizing I might not get the chance to say goodbye. I went, of course I went. I told my wife I needed to do this alone. She didn't argue. She just hugged me, kissed my forehead, and said, "Take your time." The hospital room was too bright. Too clean. The kind of clean that smells like bleach and sterilized regret. My mom was unconscious. Tubes in her nose. Monitors beeping. Her face looked smaller. I stood there for a long time, not knowing what to say. Eventually, I said the only thing I could. "I didn't think it would be like this." She woke up 2 days later. And for the first 30 seconds, she didn't recognize me. That was the real punch. Not the tubes. Not the bruises. Not the slurred speech or shaking hands. It was the way her eyes looked at me like I was a stranger. I said, "Hi, Mom, it's me." And she blinked and said, "I'm sorry." Who? That moment split me in half. Because I'd spent so much time preparing myself for a final confrontation, a moment of catharsis, something, anything, that would justify the years of distance. But what I got instead was erasure. She didn't remember the fight. She didn't remember the wedding. She didn't remember that I hadn't called. She remembered my name eventually. Pieces came back, slowly, foggy memories, half-formed thoughts. But by then, something in me had already cracked. Not because I was sad she forgot, but because I realized I wanted her to remember. I wanted the confrontation. I wanted to ask why she was so hard on me. Why she picked at every little thing. Why she couldn't just be happy for me. But you can't fight someone who doesn't remember what they did. You can't yell at a woman who looks at you like she's afraid you're a nurse with bad news. So I stayed. For 3 days, I sat next to her bed, holding her hand, helping her drink water through a straw, watching as my mother, the sharp, proud, exhausting woman who never let me win an argument became someone soft, vulnerable, and for the first time in my life, she needed me. Not as a sounding board, not as a target, not as a symbol of all the ways she felt disappointed by the world, just as her child, and I didn't know how to be that anymore. Recovery was slow. She moved from ICU to a step-down unit and eventually into a short-term rehab facility. The doctors were cautious, not pessimistic, just measured. She may regain most of her cognitive function, they said, but some things will be different. That phrase stuck with me. Some things will be different. At first, I visited out of obligation. I told myself I was just doing what a decent person does. You don't abandon your mother in a rehab facility, even if she once made you feel like you were never quite enough. But then she started remembering more. She knew my name consistently. She recognized my sister. She even asked how my job was going, though she called my wife Emily, which isn't her name. She never asked about the wedding. She never mentioned it at all. And I couldn't decide if that was a blessing or a curse. Part of me wanted to believe she didn't bring it up because she was ashamed. That she knew she'd crossed a line and now, with this second chance, she was trying not to push it. But a louder part of me feared something else entirely. That she didn't care. That even after everything, after the stroke, the hospital, the blank stares and shaky memories, she still didn't think she'd done anything wrong. That she still saw herself as the victim. I carried that tension into every visit. I smiled, I held her hand. I asked how she was feeling. But I also watched for signs, some flicker of awareness, some indication that she knew. And then one day it came. It was a Tuesday. I brought her a book, a mystery novel, the kind she used to devour in a day back when her mind was sharp and hungry. She held it in her lap and stared at it for a long time. Then she said, without looking at me, "You didn't invite me to your wedding." My throat closed. I nodded slowly. No, I didn't. She didn't say anything for a while, just ran her fingers along the edge of the book. Then, did I deserve that? The way she said it, not angry, not defensive, made me pause. Because I'd rehearsed this moment, in my head for months. All the things I wanted to say, all the hurt I'd buried. I imagined this confrontation like a storm, loud, cathartic, final. But now that it was here, I didn't feel anger. I felt grief. Grief for the years we lost. Grief for the version of her I'd never get. Grief for the part of me that still needed her to be someone else. I said, at the time, it felt like the only way I could protect myself. She nodded. And then she said something I never expected to hear from her. I wasn't kind to you. I thought being tough would make you strong. But I think all I did was make you tired. Tears hit me before I even knew they were coming. I turned away, wiped my face with my sleeve, and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe she'd said it. She reached over, placed her hand on mine, and said, "I don't remember everything. But I remember that I loved you. I always have. That's not a Hollywood apology. It didn't erase anything. But in that moment, it was enough. Not to forget. But to begin. After that conversation, things didn't change overnight. There was no movie montage of repaired memories and tearful laughter over photo albums. Life doesn't really work that way. But there was something quieter, and maybe more real. A shift in posture, in tone, in how we talked to each other. I started visiting more often. Not out of guilt. Not even out of duty. I just wanted to. Sometimes I brought my wife. Sometimes I came alone. My mom was still her, opinionated, sharp when she felt well enough. But there was a softness now. A slowness. Like she'd been sanded down at the edges by everything she'd been through. One afternoon, a nurse came in while we were sitting in her room and asked, "And this is your son?" My mom smiled, looked over at me, and said, "Yes, and I'm trying to be better for him." It caught me off guard. Not because it was performative. It wasn't. But because it was the first time I'd ever heard her express change as a choice. Not as an excuse. Not as a lament. But as intent. That stayed with me. A week later, she asked to see pictures from the wedding. I hesitated. Told her I wasn't sure it was a good idea. She said, "If you're willing." So I showed her. Not all at once. Just a few photos. Me and my wife exchanging vows under the sycamore tree in my friend's backyard. My sister holding our dog in a tiny tuxedo. My dad tearing up as he gave a toast I barely remember because I was too overwhelmed to process anything at the time. She looked at each photo carefully. Really looked. When she saw the one of me holding my wife's hands, she whispered, "You look at her like I wish someone had looked at me." I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. She handed the phone back gently and said, "You made the right call." And just like that, the tension that had lived in my chest for years broke loose. I exhaled so deeply it felt like I hadn't been breathing right in a decade. That moment wasn't dramatic, but it was transformative. It taught me something I hadn't understood until then. Forgiveness isn't a performance. It's not an announcement. It's not always even a decision you make. Sometimes it just happens. In a breath. In a pause. In the quiet space where resentment finally gets tired and lays down to rest. After that, we started rebuilding something. I don't know what to call it. Not a new relationship. Not a healed one. Just an honest one. There are still things we don't talk about. Wounds that don't have names. But there's also presence. There's shared space. There's the comfort of sitting in silence without reaching for armor. We started watching Jeopardy together again. Like we used to when I was in high school. She still yells out answers too early. I still pretend I knew them first. And once, in the middle of Final Jeopardy, she said without turning to me, "I'm glad you didn't give up on me." And I said, "I did. But I came back." It took me a long time to realize that I was waiting for something that was never going to happen. I was waiting for my mom to become the version of a mother I thought I deserved. The gentle one, the supportive one, the kind who shows up to every play and claps like it's Broadway. The one who never criticizes, never sighs too loudly, never makes you feel like love has conditions. She wasn't that. And the truth is, she probably never could have been. She grew up in a house where emotions were either weaponized or swallowed. Her own mother once told her, "You're not here to be happy. You're here to be useful." My mom carried that sentence in her bones her whole life. Of course she didn't know how to raise a sensitive kid. Of course she mistook boundaries for rejection. She never got a blueprint for any of this. And for a long time I held that against her. But one day, a few months after her stroke, we were sitting on her porch, late spring, the air smelling like grass and warming asphalt. And she said something that stayed with me. She said, "When you were little, I was scared all the time." I turned to her, surprised. She'd never admitted fear before. She went on, "You were so good, so smart, so different from me." And I didn't know how to hold that. I thought if I kept you humble, I was protecting you. But I think maybe I was just trying to make you manageable. It wasn't an apology, but it was an opening. I told her honestly, "I used to think you didn't like me." She blinked. "Why would you think that?" And I laughed, not bitterly, just softly. "Because you always made me feel like I had to earn everything. Like being loved by you was a prize I hadn't won yet." She looked away, her eyes welling. Then she said, "I didn't know how to do it better. I wanted to, but I was so afraid of messing you up that I ended up doing exactly that." And just like that, the whole narrative I'd been carrying for 30-something years cracked wide open. Because here's what I've come to believe. Most parents didn't wake up saying, "How can I hurt my kid today?" Most of them were just trying to survive their own unresolved pain, their own inherited fears, their own invisible damage. And sometimes that survival looked like silence, or control, or criticism, or emotional absence. And yeah, that damage still counts. It still hurts. It still matters. But it also has a shape. And once you see that shape, you stop trying to break it. You just understand it, name it, walk around it instead of into it every time. My mom didn't change who she was, but she let me change how I saw her. And that's what made the difference. Now, when I visit, she still tells me I need a haircut. She still critiques my posture. She still tries to hand me $20 every time I take out her trash, like she's paying me for my time. But she also listens. She asks about my wife. She remembers her name now. She asks how my work is going, not in a condescending way, but with genuine curiosity. And sometimes when we sit in silence, she reaches for my hand. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't have to. Last week, my mom turned 68. We didn't throw a big party. She wouldn't have wanted that anyway. We just had dinner at her house. Me, my wife, my sister, her husband, and our daughter. It was the first time in years that we were all at the same table. We ate takeout Chinese food off paper plates. My daughter spilled soy sauce on the tablecloth, and my mom didn't even flinch. She just dabbed it with a napkin and said, "Well, that table always needed a story." Later, after cake and bad coffee, My wife took our daughter upstairs to put her down for a nap, and my sister went out to take a phone call. And it was just the two of us, my mom and me, sitting in the living room in that late afternoon quiet that feels almost like peace. She was holding one of the framed wedding photos I'd finally given her last Christmas, looking at it like it was a window into a house she used to live in. She said, "You looked so sure." I said, "I was." Then she smiled, a tired, kind smile, and said, "I'm glad she loves you." "I'm glad I let her," I said. She reached over and took my hand. It still surprises me, that gesture. It used to feel like the kind of thing that belonged in someone else's family, the kind of softness I only saw in movies. But now it's become a quiet part of us. She said, "I know I missed some big things." I said, "Yeah." She looked away, nodded. And then, "Thank you for not staying gone." That line stuck with me. Because she was right. I could have stayed gone. There was a version of this story where I never visited the hospital, never answered my sister's call, never let myself feel anything beyond the protective bitterness I'd worked so hard to build. But that's not the story I chose. I chose to come back, not because she earned it, not because I owed it to her, but because I didn't want to carry the weight of unfinished conversations forever. Because I needed peace. Because I wanted to be free of the loop that kept replaying in my head. The one where I'm 16 and she's yelling about my grades and I'm yelling about how she never listens and the door slams and nothing ever gets better. I wanted something to get better. And it has, not in some sweeping cinematic way, but in dinners, and Jeopardy, and shared silences, and awkward hugs, and simple acknowledgments that we both did our best with what we had, even if what we had wasn't always enough. I used to think reconciliation meant erasure. Now I know it means recognition. I see her clearly now. Not as the villain of my childhood or the hero of my healing, just as a woman. A complicated, hurting, trying woman. And in seeing her that way, I've made space to be seen too. As a son, not the perfect one, but the one who came back.